quote, if we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state. In other words, we could compare hard evidence on the legacy of slavery with hard evidence on the legacy of liberals, close quote. And so there it is, life is hard. You use the word hard, you use the word serious, you use evidence. Tom Sowell is a man of the constrained vision through and through and through, correct?
Yes.
No.
Yes, part of a vanishing breed, I might add.
So when you were a Marxist, the notion, explain that, because the Marxism.
Well, but no, you see,
yeah, so that's complicated.
Even when I was a Marxist, I had the same intellectual standards.
Right.
And that's what eventually led me away from it.
Oh, I see.
In other words, I hadn't done all the research. I hadn't gone around the world
looking for evidence.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So
socialism is a great idea. That does not mean it's a great reality. One of the things that disturbs me tremendously is about this enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders and socialism at a time when people are literally starving in Venezuela, an oil-rich country. And they're breaking into grocery stores to try to get food, and they're fleeing to neighboring countries, most of which are not all that prosperous themselves, but at least you don't starve to death in them. And none of that makes a bit of difference. Mm-hmm. I don't think most of these people who are out there cheering for Bernie Sanders have given a thought to Venezuela.
To the evidence.
That's right.
To the evidence.
Yes.
All right. Which brings us to something that you refer to in a number of columns as the retrogression, the experience of African Americans in this country. Economic progress, I'm quoting you. Despite the grand myth that black economic progress began or accelerated with the passage of the civil rights laws and the war on poverty programs of the 1960s, the fact is that the poverty rate among blacks fell from 87% in 1940 to 47% in 1960. But over the next 20 years, the poverty rate among blacks fell another 18 percentage points. This was just the continuation of a previous economic trend, but at a slower rate of progress. It was not some grand deliverance, close quote. That is so counter to what we are taught in school, what appears on the editorial pages of newspapers, that I feel as though I want to ask you, you really want to stick with that assertion?
I have more evidence in my most recent book, Discrimination and Disparities. I point out that this really is a pattern not peculiar to blacks or even to the United States, that you can see the same thing in England, you can see it in any number of other countries, that the poor were much worse off economically, let's say in the first half of the 20th century, and yet in terms of their own behavior, they were far more decent societies, and afterwards, after this welfare state that's supposed to make them better off and better human beings, that's when the crime rate skyrocketed on both sides of the Atlantic. The British were famous for being perhaps the most polite, considerate society in the world. Prior to that. After that, you get things like the 2011 riots over there, went through London, Manchester, where they're going through this. They anticipated Ferguson and Baltimore by a few years. And the same thing is the burning down of buildings, the throwing of gasoline bombs, the whole smear. And none of those people were descendants of slaves.
So the poor people were doing, if the lesson of the 20th century is something like poor people, including in this country African Americans, were improving their lot and leading fundamentally decent lives until the government decided to help them.
Yeah, yes.
That's a fair statement.
Well, they're better off economically because of what's been given.
Right.
But of course, when you have the crime rate, I mean, I got the first inkling of this some years back when I was at some school in Harlem doing some research, And I had looked out the window, and I mentioned in passing that when I was a little kid, I used to walk my dog in that park, and looks of horror came over the students' faces. Nobody in his right mind would have a child go into that park, walking a dog or not. The principal was warning these students not to cross this park, which is about a block and a half wide, even in groups of 6. And when I tell them about how in his hot summer nights I would sleep out on the fire escapes in Harlem, they looked at me like I was a man from Mars. People were doing that all over New York. They were doing it in Philadelphia, Washington, wherever I've known people. That was a common thing for poor people. We didn't have the money for air conditioning.
Right.
You slept out on the fire escape or in the parks. Where Walter grew up in a
Walter Williams.
Walter Williams grew up in a housing project in Philadelphia. He was saying on the hot summer nights, the people would be in this project would have little balconies. They'd sleep out on the balconies, and the ones on the first floor who didn't have balconies would sleep out in the yard. And that there were old men who you could see sit on a hot summer night, sitting outdoors into the wee hours playing cards or checkers or whatever. It was a different world.
It was a safe world.
And it was infinitely safer.
Now, what about family structure, Tom? Again, I'm quoting you. Most black children were being raised in 2-parent families in 1960. 30 years after the liberal welfare state, the great majority of black children were being raised by single parents.
Yes.
How does that? By the way, we should note that Patrick Moynihan publishes the Moynihan Report in 1965.
Yes.
And he's alarmed because the illegitimacy rate among black families is 25% then. Now, among whites, it's over a third.
Yes.
Hispanics, it's over half. And among African Americans, it's over 70%. What's going on there?
Well, this is, again, this too, you find the same thing in Britain, you find it in France, in Norway, you find it in the Western world. In fact,
The dissolution of the family structure.
Oh, yeah, there are any number of Western nations where 40% of the children are raised with only one parent.
Right.
At the extremes, compared to Asian countries, at the extremes, Iceland, it's 2 out of 3 children born are raised in a single-parent home. In South Korea, it's 1 out of 66.
Wow. Wow. And so that's the welfare state?
Yes.
It is.
Oh, you're paying. You're creating a situation where if the first of all, you're creating a situation where if the man stays there, the government will not give the woman welfare, and if he leaves, it will. And so they're paying. When you pay people not to get married, more people don't get married.
Right. Okay. So what would have happened if Lyndon Johnson, instead of becoming a liberal, had remained a crusty, tough, skeptical Texas conservative,
yes,
which is certainly the way he started his career? If Lyndon Johnson had embraced the constrained vision instead of instituting the war on poverty and the Great Society and so forth, what would the country look like today?
A lot better. You would not have the same rates for crime and so on. Because, you see, you can't have a welfare state in a democratic country unless you first have a welfare state vision. And when you buy all the assumptions of that vision, then you're buying a lot of trouble. One of the episodes I think epitomized it was in France in this case, that there were knife attacks by various people from North Africa against Chinese people in some suburb of Paris. And one of the things that the attackers said, that why are you attacking the Chinese? And it wasn't because of anything the Chinese had done to them. He said, they have nice clothes and big cars. That's not fair. I mean, that's, egalitarianism as a philosophy is one thing, but the actual consequences of it mean things like resenting other people's good fortune.
Right.